How far would you go to save the ones you love? Like many, I had high hopes for Phrolova's story, and still Kuro exceeded expectations. It's rare for gacha stories to stick the landing when it comes to villains. Even rarer still is one which dares to ask hard questions and then refuses to give the easy answers. We've known Phrolova for a long time. Her presence in WuWa wasn't just a shadowy figure or mysterious tease. She had history, charisma, and complexity from the start. I didn't need her to be redeemed. I just wanted her to be done justice. So, going into this quest, I was hopeful, but also wary. I've been burnt before. As I covered in more detail in my video on gacha villains, antagonists are incredibly important in storytelling, and they have been a consistent source of disappointment in the gacha space at large. In WuWa specifically, there were two playable characters where we had hints that they may have been antagonists, but those hints only existed before we really knew them, and neither was a villain in the end. Combine that with the tendency of gachas in general, and it was natural for people to be concerned. However, Phrolova was different. We had encountered her many times before, and she was always a charismatic and compelling antagonist. While the concern other people felt was understandable, I was pretty certain that Kuro would not repeat those common mistakes. My question was whether she would remain a truly evil villain or gain some extra depth and move to the darker end of moral grey. I would have been happy with either, but usually prefer the latter. In the week between the quest's release and my finding time to play it, I managed to avoid spoilers, but saw some more general comments which set some different expectations. Some vocal people said they hated Rover now, which made it seem like perhaps they had completely flipped the script and revealed the Rover of the past to be some evil mass murderer. Maybe the hints were right and they were behind the fractious all along, and everything we'd done so far was about to be recontextualized. Others made it seem like they had gone to the other extreme with Phrolova too, and portrayed her as even more unforgivably evil than they had ever dared before. The tension between these two camps of people was plain for everyone to see. I was pretty sure these takes were hyperbole, but at least those strong reactions made it pretty clear that whatever happened, the quest was going to be good. I still thought they would take the path I had originally expected, but my confidence was a little less secure. But while several people who obviously didn't pay attention claimed my take in that previous video had aged like milk, Kuro did exactly what I expected, exactly what I'd hoped for. We got an explanation, but no excuses. We got a tragic, sympathetic backstory which was not sullied by an empty and unsatisfying redemption. Phrolova remains herself, revealed but unchanged, and I wouldn't have it any other way. One interesting point this raises is whether this means she's morally grey. Her actions in the story are those of a true villain, and nothing excuses what she's done. But for me, the spark of humanity revealed by her backstory pushes her just a step into moral grey. We can at least sympathise with where she came from, even if her crimes are unforgivable. That's a hard balance to strike, and it's impressive that Kuro stuck the landing. As I've said before, WuWa's presentation has been top tier right from the start of version 1, yet they continue to improve. The visuals were gorgeous. From start to finish, the quest was crammed with moments of beauty. The cinematography was fantastic, the use of contrast and colour and camera angles was mesmerising, and there was not a single moment where the story lost its grip on me. In terms of vibes, much of it echoed the early days of WuWa's story. Renacita's aesthetic is much brighter and more vibrant, but as someone who had been really excited to explore that dark and twisted science fantasy aesthetic, this return was very welcome. That extra contrast helped set the tone, and everything felt ominous. Much of it reminded me of the parts of Expedition 33, which I had the time to play so far. That area where it feels like you're beneath the ocean, the water walls you go through to traverse from one area to another, even the visual effects used when TDs or even people disintegrated into cascades of red petals, an echo of the Gamache. And fittingly, this was the first time where WuWa's music won me over for an entire quest. It has always had some fantastic tracks and moments of brilliance, but most of the time it faded into inoffensive background noise which added a little flavour to the atmosphere but didn't truly live up to its potential. This time around, the music was a constant presence. The atmosphere it created was tense, uncertain, and reinforced the anxiety as our fragile alliance with Phrolova waxed and waned, and their conflict always felt very close at hand. And in particular, it tied in beautifully with Phrolova's backstory. We learned that she was once an innocent and pure-hearted young musician, a composer who dreamed of performing for the world. There were some hints of disagreement between her and her mother, but her hometown looked idyllic, and it was filled with people who clearly have a lot of love for her. But it was all taken from her far too soon. A meteor destroyed her home, her friends, her family, all gone in an instant in front of her very eyes. She was the lone survivor, saved by the awakening of her resonance ability, through which she collected the dying frequencies of her loved ones before they could fade away. Everything she did from that day onwards, to me, seems to stem from survivor's guilt, which grew into obsession and led to her taking things too far. She's no longer truly alive, she's half human, half TD, and therefore cannot die, and her only goal is to turn her lost beyond into a sanctuary of eternal peace in which she and her loved ones can live forever. For decades, she tried anything and everything to achieve her goal. Prayers sent to the Sentinel were left unanswered. The world of science mocked her as a fraud and tried to study her immortal body instead. The people feared her questions and accused her of witchcraft and heresy. Lost, defeated, still carrying the voices of her loved ones in her head, she turned to music as her solace. She wrote and conducted a celebrated symphony, but while to her it was a lament for all she had lost, to others it was simply beautiful. Until, by chance, a stranger heard the sadness hidden in her song and sympathized with her. This stranger gave her hope that change could happen and promised to return once she completed her symphony. She traveled the world, and at every performance she hoped they would appear again and continue their conversation. But every time she was left disappointed. That last spark of hope began to fade, and she slipped even further into despair. Until, eventually, another heard her lament and promised her everything she had ever wanted. The Grand Architect of the Fractious showed her that they could bring back at least an imitation of the ones she had lost, and promised that their goals aligned, and that if they worked together, they could break the limits of the world. Hope rekindled. She accepted their proposal. And from then on, her quest turned to even darker means to achieve her end. Human experimentation, murder, genocide. Nothing would even give her pause in her pursuit of her dream. By the end, she is well and truly lost. Phrolova's backstory shows the depth of her emotions. It shows us what she lost and what she has been through in her quest to fix the world. It explains her actions without excusing them. In the end, she doesn't really care whether it's reality or illusion. She doesn't care who she hurts along the way or what price she has to pay. She just wants to live with her lost loved ones once again. Before we discuss the Rover's role in this, I think it's fascinating to see the parallel between Phrolova and Genshin's Capitano. Yes, I did just bring up the other game. At the end of Natlan's story, it's revealed that Capitano has endured endless torment for hundreds of years because he has been carrying around the souls of his lost comrades the entire time, in the hopes of finding some way to save them. Sound familiar? This idea is such a rich and layered character motivation, and I'm sure it's been done before elsewhere. The reason I bring him up is that the difference in how they were presented is stark, and it highlights how fantastic the storytelling was in Phrolova's quest. In Capitano's case, this revelation was dumped on us in some dialogue, used as a deus ex machina to solve the dilemma the group of heroes were facing, then depicted in a frankly stunning cutscene as he passes from the world, all in the space of a few minutes. All of this was never hinted at before, and this ability was not built on any previously understood mechanics. Meanwhile, Phrolova's situation is shown to us via gameplay first, which lets us put the pieces together over time. It's common across many games to show characters reminiscing via ghostly apparitions of the people they're thinking of, but it became more and more obvious through our conversations that something more was happening here. And then, eventually, it was confirmed. This is her life. For centuries now, she has seen and heard the voices of lost loved ones begging her to bring them back. The same situation as Capitano, but shown through storytelling in a visceral way. And in WuWa's case, all the puzzle pieces were there for us to see already. We've encountered Sonora spheres countless times before. We knew the Fractious have experimented with merging humans and TDs. We knew the world was constructed out of resonating frequencies and that magic exists in the manipulation of these frequencies. It was immensely satisfying to see this story point done right. The other core of the story was the relationship between the Rover and Phrolova. They start off in an interesting place. Phrolova is in a weakened, vulnerable state, but manages to save Rover from drowning by dragging them into her sonorosphere. This does not earn her Rover's trust, but it stays their hand long enough for her to propose a truce. At that moment, they have a shared goal: to find the crystallized remains of the power which the Thronodian had poured into Mia's body and prevent it from falling into the hands of Fenrico and the Order of the Deep. Throughout the story, they dance around each other, never trusting, never quite connecting. There are moments where it seems they might begin to understand one another, but it always falls apart through mistrust, misconception, and plain old disagreement. I particularly love those moments when Rover asks her a question and Phrolova just outright dismisses them. It's fitting for her character, it's refreshing to see someone treat Rover in a different way, and it builds intrigue and tension. One fantastic detail in this quest was that there were several moments where the rover can choose to either trust Phrolova's suggestions or take a different path. If you choose to trust her, you continue forwards as expected. But if you distrust her, you actually get to split and try that other direction, discover for yourself that her guidance was correct, and then return to her to continue on. It makes perfect sense that she would know the best path, and I love that they left it up to us to decide how much the rover would trust her at each moment in time. Whether you choose defiance or ascent, both paths make perfect sense within the context of the story, and both lead to the same conclusion, but the fact that they exist truly elevates the storytelling. It might sound like a simple trick, but the level of immersion it grants makes such a difference. It puts the player in the rover's shoes and forces them to experience the choice they're making every step along the way. Everything that follows feels just that little bit more real because you've taken part in it yourself. And then we get one of the most contentious parts of the story. Rover sees Phrolova's past and it's revealed that they were the one who made that promise on which she pinned so much hope. But Rover doesn't trust the vision. They realize Phrolova was trying to use that memory to trap them in her sphere, and that's the exact moment when she recovered all her strength, implying her weakened state may have been a ruse. Despite her tragic past, I wouldn't say she had earned Rover's trust before that point and merely gained some sympathy, so their suspicion and doubt makes perfect sense to me. A lot of the discussion around this quest focuses on the Rover's promise because Phrolova herself was so fixated on it. To me, building your life around a single promise made by a stranger after a brief conversation is just a little bit unhinged, no matter how persuasive and compelling that stranger might have been. And that's perfectly appropriate for her state of mind at that point. She had been trying and failing for decades. Through her music, she was crying out about her torment in front of crowds of people who were all oblivious to her pain and instead congratulated her on the beauty of her work. If she wasn't insane already, that experience over and over and over, coupled with the voices of the dead ringing in her ears, would certainly have done the job. And then, finally, someone could see the emotion behind her compositions. It must have felt like a lifeline suddenly cast into the storm. Of course she held on to it so tight, and the slow realization that her hope was in vain was just the final step in her undoing. But while we know how momentous it was from her perspective, I just don't think we have enough context to really pass any judgment on this past incarnation of the rover for their actions here. We don't know whether they understood just how desperate and broken Phrolova was inside, what they really intended to promise to her, what other quests or crises might have taken them away, or what else they had been thinking. It is callous of them to have put such emphasis on how reliably they fulfill their promises, but perhaps that's the point. There's such a blank slate that it's hard to speculate. It could even be another ruse by the Grand Architect imitating past Rover to manipulate Phrolova further towards despair to leave her ripe for recruitment, and Rover themselves never saw her performance at all. Either way, while the intent behind the promise is up to interpretation, Phrolova clearly thought it meant they would return very soon, and that last disappointment led her down an even darker path. The final hour or so of the quest was absolutely brilliant. The tension was at its height, the truth remained uneasy, and any semblance of trust was completely gone. Despite that, they were able to work together, to confront Fenrico, to hold back the dark tide, and to fight him and win their victory together. But the moment they achieved their goal, their truth began to crumble. The rover made one last attempt to persuade Phrolova that her plan would never work, but she could not be convinced. For every point he tried to make, she had a swift rebuttal, and for many, she kinda had a point. It all came back to that initial question: how far would you go to save the ones you love? And Phrolova's answer is clear: no matter how steep the price, she'll gladly pay it. That is why she's a villain. Even though her story is founded on love, loss, and loneliness, in the end, she would stop at nothing to achieve her goals, even if that price was the lives of every person in the world. And to drive the point home, she points out that it was Rover's broken promise which led to how she sees the world. Their barbed conversation while they circled one another, weapons drawn, brought Phrolova's pain and anger bubbling to the surface, and their truth shattered once and for all. A flash of combat left the rover frozen and Mia's gem in Phrolova's hands, but Rover broke free and threw their sword to knock it from her hand. It pierced her heart instead. Cristoforo escaped with the gem, and Phrolova sank into the depths and merged with the Sonorosphere, reunited with her loved ones once more. I've seen that many are angry that a rover would do this, but I really don't think they had a choice. That gem held the power of the Thronodian. It could not be surrendered to the fractious just because Phrolova revealed her tragic past. The fracturing of their alliance was brilliantly done, and both characters reacted just as I'd have expected. But what actually changed my opinion on the rover was the lack of reaction to Phrolova's death. She had been their main antagonist from the moment Rover returned to the world. Their alliance was a timid and temporary one, and the fatal blow was intended to just knock the gem from her hands. But Rover was supposed to be the hero, and when a good, empathetic person accidentally kills someone, you expect them to react, especially when they had just learned about the tragic past. Instead, they just look mildly shocked and then turn and walk away. This seemed so callous, so dismissive, as if to say, damn, oh well, the story continues, and move on to the next thing. The contrast between the way I felt in that moment, the shock, the conflict, the meaning of it all, and the way the Rover reacted was such a different approach to their characterization compared to key moments in the past. The other times Rover felt most like a character to me were ones where they stepped up and made some decision that I wanted them to make. Those felt like player agency. This was something else. The Rover's pointed absence of emotion felt like a compelling statement that there's more depth there than we know. It brought to mind Phrolova's final point. Memories, emotions, history, and bonds with loved ones. Those are all essential to make us human, so how can a true hero cast them all aside? Just who is the Rover really? How much humanity is left within them? I love this twist. It sets up Rover as a true character with potential for internal conflicts rather than just a bland hero solving external ones. This potential was always there in the lore, but until now had not shown up in the story in any meaningful way. There's still a chance that this was some errant writing flaw where they didn't really think the implications through, but their attention to detail throughout the quest was so strong, and it was such a pivotal moment that I'm convinced it was deliberate. So it goes without saying that Kuro gave us exactly what we wanted in Phrolova, a complex, deep and nuanced character who is still unapologetically villainous. The central moral dissonance which underlines her story is a fascinating one. How far would you go to save the ones you love? Phrolova's answer to that question is one which many in the real world would echo, as far as it takes. To some, that means she's not a villain, but by any objective measure, regardless of the source of her motivation, her actions are still evil. We can empathize with her and acknowledge her pain and suffering, but looking from the outside in, the ends do not justify the means. It isn't even close. The tragedy of it all is that what she's holding on to now are warped and fading echoes of the frequencies of those she loved. While the fundamental world building is that the entire universe is a symphony of vibrations, her friends and family did die, and no matter what she does, the best she'll ever have are twisted imitations of what she lost. It reminds me so much of the messed up moral dilemmas explored in painful detail in Full Metal Alchemist, especially the tragedy of Nina. When your story starts to echo that absolute gut punch, you know you're onto something good. In the end, we see Phrolova with her friends and family living in their beautiful little town, spending time together. But we also see the truth, her alone, holding tight to her memories as she sinks into the abyss. One thing that's for certain is that while she is technically dead, and the story's finale is satisfying on how it handles that point, there are still very clear avenues within the mechanics of the world for her to return at some point in the future. Which is why Phrolova now leads onto my other fear for gacha characters in general, that they're doomed to be forgotten. She has been such a consistent presence since the start of the game that I'd be surprised, assuming she does get resurrected, if she doesn't show up now and then as an antagonistic force we have to fight. But in gachas, it's rare for a character to continue their growth after they've had their moment in the spotlight, even if they do show up later on. The focus always turns to the next new character, and the others are left behind, unless the devs decide to do that thing where they make multiple versions of that same character, which I'm always a bit unsure about. In Phrolova, Kuro have a chance to create something better, a storyline which threads across many major versions, with layer upon layer of growth and history along the way, adding so much more depth than the repetitive, let's save the world again, with so many long-running stories devolve into. There's so much potential for change in Phrolova herself, in her relationship with the Rover, even in how the others we know who have fought her in the past would react to her continued presence. I'm normally someone who wants character deaths to be final. In Phrolova's case, I hope she returns. I hope she changes as a person, even if she's irredeemable, and provides that moral foil which reveals the Rover's hypocrisy. Overall, Phrolova is fantastic. She has such depth, such complexity, and provides such a challenge to the Rover in so many ways that once again, I find myself reconsidering my expectations of exactly what Kuro can achieve. She's determined, nihilistic, untrusting, and manipulative, and she's easily one of the most compelling antagonists around. Her backstory is a beautiful tragedy, and is a devastating expression of moral question to which there is no good answer. To some extent, I kinda wish the Rover hadn't been involved in her backstory at all, and especially that their one interaction in the past hadn't been portrayed as such a pivotal moment in her life. She's such a strong and fascinating character that those ties feel unnecessary, though I do appreciate the hints at depth it added to the Rover themselves. But either way, her story was gripping in every single moment, and the ratcheting tension and slow reveal made those 3 hours pass in the blink of an eye, yet everything about it was so memorable. Even the white text on black screen was poignant. Once I dreamt that we were dear to each other. I woke to find that we were strangers. Brilliant storytelling. And one final brief point, the one thing I kinda wish they'd handled differently was the Fenrico subplot. The cutscenes and the fight were utterly epic, and I wouldn't change them whatsoever. However, I feel that the conclusion to this storyline deserved more attention. It was great to see the Order included as a backdrop to Rover and Phrolova's more personal conflict, but it feels a little out of place that this thread ended here. It would have had more thematic depth if it had been built into a quest where our friends from Raguna had been center stage. For example, imagine Phoebe truly confronting the darkness and corruption of her church, how that would shake her belief, and how those around her could have supported her through such a fundamental shift. He does provide an interesting contrast to Phrolova in that he found redemption in his final moments, so at least his fate ties in that sense, but I just felt it was one aspect of the story which could have been better concluded elsewhere. For me, WuWa's storytelling came into its own with Cartathea's quest. Septimon was even better than I had expected, and now 2.5 is yet another triumph. The one thing I still want to see is for them to tell a story at this level of quality, which focuses on multiple characters at once. The one thing missing is those relationships between them, which can truly make the world feel as alive as any individual character. Perhaps version 2.6, with its focus on Augusta, Yuno, and hopefully Lupa too, can start to move in that direction. I'm so excited to see that the stories can have stakes and consequences, the moral questions can be nuanced with no easy answers, and the protagonist can have flaws and characterization. I can't wait to see what they come up with next. Until next time.